Chapter 3. Looking for a room? Mary made up her mind very quickly when she saw the fat, bespectacled face and heard the soft, hesitant voice. There wouldn't be any trouble. She nodded and climbed out of the car, feeling the ache in her calves as she followed him to the door of the office. He unlocked it, stepped inside the cubicle, and switched on the light. "Sorry I didn't get down sooner. I've been up at the house. Mother isn't very well." There was nothing distinctive about the office, but it was warm and dry and bright. Mary shivered gratefully and smiled up at the fat man. He bent over the ledger on the counter. "Our rooms are $7 single. Would you like to take a look first?" "That won't be necessary." She opened her purse quickly, extracting a $5 bill and 2 singles, and placed them on the counter, and he pushed the register forward and held out a pen. For a moment she hesitated, then wrote a name, Jane Wilson, and an address, San Antonio, Texas. She couldn't very well do anything about the Texas plates on the car. "I'll get your bags," he said, and came around the counter. She followed him outside again. The money was in the glove compartment, still in the same big envelope secured by the heavy rubber band. Maybe the best thing to do was to leave it there. She locked the car and nobody would disturb it. He carried the bags over to the door of the room next to the office. It was the closest, and she didn't mind. The main thing was to get out of the rain. "Nasty weather," he said, standing aside as she entered. "Have you been driving long?" "All day." He pressed a switch and the bedside lamp blossomed and sent forth yellow petals of light. The room was plainly but adequately furnished. She noted the shower stall in the bathroom beyond. Actually, she would have preferred a tub, but this would do. "Everything all right?" She nodded quickly, then remembered something. "Is there anywhere around here where I can get a bite to eat?" "Well, let's see now. There used to be a root beer and hamburger stand up the road here about 3 miles, but I guess it's closed down now since the new highway came in. No, your best bet would be Fairvale." "How far is that?" "About 17 or 18 miles. You keep going up the road until you come to a county truck. Turn right and hit the main highway again. It's 10 miles straight ahead then. I'm surprised you didn't go through that way if you're heading north." "I got lost." The fat man nodded and sighed. "I thought as much. We don't get much regular traffic along here anymore since the new road opened." She smiled absently. He stood in the doorway, pursing his lips. When she looked up to meet his stare, he dropped his eyes and cleared his throat apologetically. Miss, I was just thinking, maybe you don't feel like driving all the way up to Fairville and back in the rain. I mean, I was just going to fix a little snack for myself up at the house. You'd be perfectly welcome to join me." "Oh, I couldn't do that." "Why not? No trouble at all. Mother's gone back to bed, and she won't be doing any cooking. I was only going to set out some cold cuts and make some coffee, if that's all right with you." "Well, look, I'll just run along and get things ready. Thank you very much, Mr. Bates. Norman Bates." He backed against the door, bumping his shoulder. "Look, I'll leave you this flashlight for when you come up. You probably want to get out of those wet things first." He turned away, but not before she caught a glimpse of his reddened face. Why, he was actually embarrassed. For the first time in almost 20 hours, a smile came to Mary Crane's face. She waited until the door closed behind him and then slipped out of her jacket. She opened her overnight bag on the bed and took out a print dress. She let it hang, hoping some of the wrinkles would disappear. While she used the bathroom facilities, just time to freshen up a bit now, but when she came back, she promised herself a good hot shower. That's what she needed. That and sleep. But first a little food. Let's see now. Her makeup was in her purse, and she could wear the blue coat from the big suitcase. 15 minutes later, she was knocking on the door of the big frame house on the hillside. A single lamp shone from the unshaded parlor window, but a brighter reflection blazed from upstairs. If his mother was ill, that's where she'd be. Mary stood there waiting for a response, but nothing happened. Maybe he was upstairs too. She rapped again. Meanwhile, she peered through the parlor window. At first glance, she couldn't quite believe what she saw. She hadn't dreamed that such a place still existed in days and age. Usually, even when a house is old, there are some signs of alterations and improvement in the interior, but the parlor she peered at had never been modernized. The floral wallpaper, the dark, heavy, ornately scrolled mahogany woodwork, the turkey red carpet, the high-backed, overstuffed furniture and paneled fireplace were straight out of the gay 90s. There wasn't even a television set to intrude in incongruity in the scene, but she did notice an old, wind-up gramophone on an end table. Now she could detect a low murmur of voices, and at first she thought it might be coming from the gramophone's bell-shaped horn. Then she identified the source of the sound. It was coming from upstairs, from the lighted room. Mary knocked again, using the end of a flashlight. This time she must have made her presence known, for the sound ceased abruptly, and she kept the faint thud of footsteps. A moment later she saw Mr. Bates descending the stairs. He came to the door and opened it, gesturing her forward. "Sorry," he said. "I was just tucking Mother in for the night. Sometimes she's apt to be a bit difficult. You see, she was ill. I wouldn't want to disturb her." "Oh, you won't make any bother. She'll probably sleep like a baby." Mr. Bates glanced over his shoulder at the stairway, then lowered his voice. "Actually, she's not sick. Not physically, that is. But sometimes she gets, these spells." He nodded abruptly, then smiled. "Here, let me just take your coat and hang it up there. Now, if you'll come this way." She followed him down a hallway which extended from under the stairs. "I hope you don't mind eating in the kitchen," he murmured. "Everything's all ready for us. Sit right down and I'll pour the coffee." The kitchen was a complement of the parlor, lined with ceiling-high glassed-in cupboards grouped about an old-fashioned sink with a hand-pump attachment. The big wood stove squatted in one corner, but it gave off a grateful warmth, and the log wooden table bore a welcome display on sausage, cheese, and homemade pickles in glass dishes scattered about on the red and white checkered cloth. Mary was not inclined to smile at the quaintness of it all, and even the inevitable hand-crocheted motto on the wall seemed appropriate enough. "God bless our home." So be it. This was a lot better than sitting alone in some dingy small-town cafeteria. Mr. Bates helped her fill her plate. "Go right ahead. Don't wait for me. You must be hungry." She was hungry, and she ate heartily, with such absorption that she scarcely noticed how little he was eating. When she became aware of it, she was faintly embarrassed. "But you haven't touched a thing. I'll bet you really had your supper earlier." "No, I didn't. It's just that I'm not very hungry." He refilled her coffee cup. "I'm afraid Mother gets me a little upset sometimes." His voice lowered again, and the apologetic note returned. "I guess it is my fault. I'm not too good at taking care of her." "You live here all alone, the two of you?" "Yes, there's never been anybody else." "Never. It must be pretty hard on you." "I'm not complaining. Don't misunderstand." He adjusted the rimless spectacles. "My father went away when I was still a baby. Mother took care of me all alone. There was enough money on her side of the family to keep us going, I guess, until I grew up. Then she mortgaged the house, sold the farmland, and built this motel. We ran it together, and it was a good thing until the new highway cut us off. Actually, of course, she started failing long before then, and it was my turn to take care of her. But sometimes it isn't so easy." "There are no other relatives?" "None." "And you never married?" His face reddened, and he glanced down at the checkered tablecloth. Mary bit her lip. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to ask personal questions." "That's all right." His voice was faint. "I've never married. Mother was, funny about those things. I never ever sat at a table with a girl like this before." "But—" "Sounds odd, doesn't it? This day and age." "I know that, but it had to be. I tell myself that she'd be lost without me now, but maybe the real truth is that I'd be even more lost without her." Mary finished her coffee, fished in her purse for cigarettes, and offered the package to Mr. Bates. "No, thank you. I don't smoke." "Mind if I do?" "Not at all. Go right ahead." He hesitated. "I'd like to offer you a drink, but you see Mother doesn't approve of liquor in the house." Mary leaned back, inhaling. Suddenly she felt expansive. Funny what a little warmth, a little rest, a little food could do. An hour ago she'd been lonely, wretched, and fearfully unsure of herself. Now everything has changed. Perhaps it was listening to Mr. Bates which had altered her mood this way. He was the lonely, wretched, and fearful one, really. In contrast, she felt 7 feet tall. It was this realization which prompted her to speak. "You aren't allowed to smoke? You aren't allowed to drink? You aren't allowed to see any girls?" Just what do you do besides run the motel and attend to your mother? Apparently, he was unconscious of her tone of voice. Oh, I've got lots of things to do, really. I read quite a bit. And there are other hobbies. He glanced up at the wall shelf as she followed his gaze. A stuffed squirrel peered down at them. Hunting? Well, no, just taxidermy. George Blanc gave me that squirrel to stuff. He shot it. Mother doesn't want me to handle firearms. Mr. Bates, you'll pardon me for saying this, but how long do you intend to go on this way? You're a grown man. You certainly must realize that you can't be expected to act like a little boy all the rest of your life. I don't mean to be rude, but I understand. I'm well aware of the situation. As I told you, I've done a bit of reading. I know what the psychologists say about such things, but I have a duty toward my mother. Wouldn't you perhaps be fulfilled the duty of her and to yourself as well if you arranged to put her in an institution? She's not crazy. The voice wasn't soft and apologetic any longer. It was high and shrill, and the pudgy man was on his feet, his hand sweeping a cup from the table. It shattered on the floor, but Mary didn't look at it. She could only stare into the shattered face. She's not crazy, he repeated. No matter what you think or anybody thinks, no matter what the book says or what the doctors would say out at the asylum, I know all about that. They'd certify her in a hurry and lock her away if they could. And all I have to do is give them the word, but I wouldn't because I know. Don't you understand that? I know. And they don't know. They don't know how she took care of me for all those years when there was nobody else who cared, how she worked for me and suffered because of me, the sacrifices she made. If she's a little odd now, it's my fault. I'm responsible. When she came to me that time, told me she wanted to get married again, I'm the one who stopped her. Yes, I stopped her. I was to blame for that. You don't have to tell me about jealousy, possessiveness. I was worse than she could ever be. 10 times crazier, if that's the word you want to use. They'd have locked me up in a minute if they knew the things I said and did, the way I carried on. Well, I got over it finally, and she didn't. But who are you to say a person should be put away? I think perhaps all of us go a little crazy at times. He stopped now because he was out of words, but because he was also out of breath. His face was very red. The puckered lips were beginning to tremble. Mary stood up. I'm sorry, she said softly. Really, I am. I want to apologize. I had no right to say what I did. Yes, I know, but it doesn't matter. It's just that I'm not used to talking about these things. You live alone like this, and everything gets bottled up or stuffed like the squirrel up there. His color lightened, and he attempted a smile. Cute little fellow, isn't he? I've often wished I'd had to live one around that I could tame for a pet. Mary picked up her purse. I'll be running along now. It's getting late. Please don't go. I'm sorry I made such a fuss. It isn't that. I'm really very tired. But I thought perhaps we could talk a while. I was going to tell you about my hobbies. I've got a sort of workshop down in the basement. No, I like to, but I simply must get some rest. All right, then. I'll walk down with you. I've got to close up the office. It doesn't look as if there'll be any more business tonight. They went through the hall, and he helped her on with her coat. He was clumsy about it, and for a moment she felt rising irritation, then checked it as she realized the cause. He was afraid to touch her. That was it. The poor guy was actually afraid to get near a woman. He held the flashlight, and she followed him out of the house and down the pathway to the gravel drive curving around the motel. The rain had stopped, but the night was still dark and starless, and she turned the corner of the building. She glanced back over her shoulder at the house. The upstairs light still burned, and Mary wondered if the old woman was awake, if she had listened to their conversation, heard the final outbursts. Mr. Bates halted before her door, waited until she inserted the key in the lock and opened it. Good night, he said. Sleep well. Thank you, and thank you for your hospitality. He opened his mouth, then turned away. For the third time that evening she saw him redden. Then she stopped her door and locked it. She could hear his retreated footsteps, then the telltale click as he entered the office next door. She didn't hear him when he left. Her attention had been immediately occupied by the duty of unpacking. She got out her pajamas, her slippers, a jar of cold cream, a toothbrush, and toothpaste. Then she rummaged through the big suitcase looking for the dress she planned to wear tomorrow when she saw Sam. That would have to be put up now to hang out the wrinkles. Nothing much be out of place tomorrow. Nothing must be out of place. All at once she didn't feel 7 feet tall anymore. Or was the change really so sudden? Hadn't it started when Mr. Bates got so hysterical back there at the house? What was it that he said that really deflated her? I think perhaps all of us go a little crazy at times. Mary Crane cleared a place for herself on the bed and sat down. Yes, it was true. All of us go a little crazy at times, just as she gone crazy yesterday afternoon when she saw the money on the desk, and she'd been crazy ever since. She must have been crazy to think she could get away with what she planned. It had all seemed like a dream come true, and that's what it was, a dream, a crazy dream. She knew it now. Maybe she could manage to throw off the police, but Sam would ask questions. Who was the relative she inherited the money from? Where had he lived? Why hadn't she ever mentioned him before? How was that she brought the money along in cash? Didn't Mr. Lowry object to her quitting her job so suddenly? And then there was Lilla. Suppose she reacted as Mary had anticipated, came to her without going to the police, even consented to remain silent in the future because of a sense of obligation. The fact remained that she knew, and there'd be complications. Sooner or later, Sam would want to visit her down there or invite her up, and that would never work. She could never keep up a future relationship with her sister, never explain to Sam why it was impossible to do so, why she wouldn't go back to Texas even for a visit. No, the whole thing was crazy, and it was too late to do anything about it now. Or was it? Suppose she got herself some sleep. A good long 10 hours of sleep. Tomorrow was Sunday. If she left here about 9 and drove straight through, she could be back in town Monday morning early, before Lilla arrived from Dallas, before the bank opened. She could deposit the money and go to work from there. Sure, she'd be dead tired, but it wouldn't kill her, and nobody would ever know. There was the matter of the car, of course. That would take some explaining for Lilla's benefit. Maybe she could tell her that she started out for Fairvale intending to surprise Sam over the weekend. The car broke down and she had to have it towed away. The dealer said it would need a new engine, so she decided to junk it, take this one, heap instead, and come back home. Yes, that would sound reasonable. Of course, when she figured everything up, this trip would actually cost about $700. That was what the car had been worth, but the price was worth paying. $700 isn't too much to pay for one's sanity, for one's safety, one's future security. Mary stood up. She'd do it. And all at once she was 7 feet tall again. It was that simple. If she'd been a religious girl, she would have prayed. As it was, she felt a curious sense of what was the word, predestination, as if everything that had happened was somehow fated to be. Her turning off on the wrong road, coming here, meeting the pathetic man, listening to his outburst, hearing the final sentence which brought her to her senses. For a moment she could have gone to him and kissed him, until she realized with a giggle what a response would be to such a gesture. The poor old geezer would probably faint. She giggled again. It was nice to be 7 feet tall, but the question was, would she be able to fit inside the shower stall? And that's what she was going to do right now. Take a nice, long, hot shower. Get the dirt off her hide, just as she was going to get the dirt cleaned out of her insides. Come clean, Mary. Come clean as snow. She stepped into the bathroom, kicked off her shoes, stooping to slip her stockings off. Then she raised her arms, pulled the dress over her head, tossed it into the next room. It missed the bed, but she didn't care. She unhooked her bra, swung it in an arc, and let it sail. Now the panties. For a moment she stood before the mirror set in the door and took stock of herself. Maybe the face was 27, but the body was free, white, and 21. She had a good figure. A damn good figure. Sam would like it. She wished he was here to admire it now. It was going to be hell to wait another 2 years, but then she'd make up for lost time. They say a woman isn't fully matured sexually until she's 30. That was something to find out about. Mary giggled again, then executed an amateurish bump and grind, tossed her image a kiss and received one in return. After that, she stepped into the shower stall. The water was hot, and she had to add a mixture from the cold faucet. Finally, she turned both faucets on full force and let the warmth gush over her. The roar was deafening, and the room was beginning to steam up. That's why she didn't hear the door open or note the sound of footsteps. And at first, when the shower curtains parted, the steam obscured the face. Then she did see if there's just a face peering through the curtain, hanging in mid-air like a mask. A headscarf concealed the hair, and the glassy eyes stared inhumanly. But it wasn't a mask. It couldn't be. The skin had been powdered dead white, and 2 hectic spots of rouge centered on the cheekbones. It wasn't a mask. It was the face of the crazy old woman. Mary started to scream, and then the curtains parted further, and a hand appeared, holding a butcher knife. It was a knife that, a moment later, cut off her scream and her head.